I'm Walter S. Gerard, Sunday School Director for New Spirit Baptist Church here in Dallas, Texas, where the Reverend Otis Grimes is pastor. Now, this is the last Sunday in Black History Month, and it's the last Sunday in February of this year. And our lesson for today, February the 25th, in the year of our Lord 2024, is faith in God's purpose. Faith in God's purpose. And the reference scriptures for this lesson are taken from the book of Habakkuk, the second chapter, and the first through the fifth verse. This is lesson 13 in our lesson series, Faith That Pleases God. And it's lesson 4 in unit 3 of this lesson series, The Righteous Live by Faith. Unit 3, The Righteous Live by Faith. Habakkuk was one of the minor prophets, which means the extent of his writings are significantly less than the writings of the major prophets. It has nothing to do with the significance or the importance of his writings. The book name for this prophet is written as a conversation between the prophet and God. The conversation takes the form of 3 questions from the prophet and God's answers to each of them. This lesson focuses on the first 2 questions and God's answers to those 2 questions. Now, reading the scriptures from the New International Version of the Bible, Habakkuk, the second chapter, and the first through the fifth verse is as follows. I will stand by my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me, and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of his holy word. Now, just trying to read and understand that without having some guidance or teaching on it would be almost impossible. Before our written text began, we can see that Habakkuk had asked God why he allowed the wealthy people of Judah to continue to oppress the poor people. God's answer was that he was raising up the Babylonians to punish Judah for its wickedness. Now, this answer was even more disturbing to the prophet than what he considered God's allowing the rich people to get away with oppressing the poor people. And also, he asked God his second question, or rather, and so he asked God his second question. Why on earth would he use a more wicked people to punish his chosen people? Now, this is where our written text begins. As the prophet waits for God's answer to his second question, he presents imagery of himself as a watchman. The comparison is that just as a watchman stationed on the wall of an ancient city patiently kept watch for any approaching danger or enemy, he would be patiently waiting for God's answer. Also, he anticipated that God would rebuke him for questioning him. So he uh, so he contemplated how he would answer God's rebuke for his question or his complaint, as it is called in verse 1. Now, in verse 2, we see God's answer. He begins by telling the prophet to write what is about to be revealed to him on tablets so that a herald could run with it. Now, in ancient times, writing was done on scrolls made of papyrus, which could easily be burned or destroyed. Here we see where God says to write on tablets, which most likely were made of stone, like the Ten Commandments were written on. These wouldn't be so easily destroyed. And by saying, quote, so that a herald may run with it, unquote, God is making it plain that the message is to be taken to all of his people. A herald would go quickly throughout the land and announce important messages, especially messages from the king. Now, this message would be from God himself. God said to wait for the revelation to take place, that it would happen at the time he had appointed it to happen, which might not be, which might not be when even the prophet uh, knew, but it would happen, and it would not be delayed from that appointed time. He goes on to talk about the Babylonians, who he calls the enemy in verse 4. He says they are puffed up and that their desire to destroy Judah and Jerusalem is not upright. And that means it's not righteous, which means it's not right with God. The reason that they wanted to destroy Judah and Jerusalem. Then he talks about his people. He says, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. This verse teaches us that God is against those who think they are so high and mighty that they can do whatever they want. However, he will use people like that to accomplish his will. In this case, to punish his people for their wickedness. Also, that unlike the person who lives like he or she can do whatever he or she wants, the one who is righteous or right with God will live by his or her faithfulness. And that's faithfulness in God, or faith in God. And in the final verse of our printed text, verse 5, we see that God says through the prophet that wine betrays the Babylonians, which is possibly a reference to the celebrations they had after each victory, and that they are arrogant and never rest. Also, that they are as greedy as the grave and are never satisfied, like death. All this is to say that the Babylonians never say enough, never say that they have conquered enough nations or taken enough people into captivity. Now, that's the end of our printed text. However, if we continue reading, we see that God will punish the Babylonians for a great many reasons. And in the last verse of chapter 2, God tells the prophet to be quiet. He says, quote, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him, unquote. That means shut up. The takeaway for us from this lesson is that God might use our enemies to punish us for our disobedience. In other words, when he wants to punish us, he might allow someone who wants to do harm to us anyway to do just that. However, because they would do harm to us out of evil intentions, he will punish them also for doing it. Also, when we see people always doing evil and it seems like they're getting away with it, we shouldn't feel like, why can't we do the same? It's because the righteous will live by their faithfulness, faith in God's purpose. God has a purpose for everything he allows to happen, and we shouldn't question it no matter how long it takes for it to be fulfilled. Faith in God's purpose. I hope you've gained at least one thought from this lesson. May God bless you, and may he ever keep you.